Good afternoon and welcome to Pellowe Talk. I'm Dave Pellowe. Joining me this afternoon is Gene Tunny, who is the Director, Principal Economist at Adept Economics, and he's also the Secretary of the Queensland branch of the Economic Society of Australia. Thanks for joining me, Gene.
Pleasure, Dave.
And happy first day of spring.
Yes. Happy first day of spring too. Yes, it's been a pretty good day. Yes.
Now, is it going to be such a happy day as it's also the first day of the Buy Queensland policy that Anastasia Palaszczuk has announced? Now, the thing is that she has said, we are going our own way with this policy. We will ignore restrictions that go against our interests. Cabinet has agreed that the state government would no longer be constrained or bound by free trade agreements that have seen jobs go offshore or interstate. Is this smart or is this a little bit dangerous?
Well, it's not good policy, Dave. So, yes, I mean, it is unfortunate that that does take effect today. So, with the Premier's remarks that you quoted, you have to look at them in the context that she was making an announcement with a view to the election. I think she was in Townsville, and they're very worried about the rise of One Nation. So a protectionist parochial measure such as this needs to be seen in that context. Unfortunately, what we end up with is bad policy. Now, the Treasurer, Curtis Pitt, on Steve Austin's ABC show this morning, clarified that, well, in his view, they are still going to be complying with the free trade agreements, but they're using exemptions within those free trade agreements that you can use to give extra weighting to local businesses and procurement. Now, I'm not an expert on the legal aspects of those free trade agreements, but I mean, that sounds like it would be contestable. I know the New Zealand Trade Minister has, he's challenged what Queensland has done. So, look, I think there's going to be a lot of, dialogue and a lot of, robust discussion between Australia and New Zealand, and then Queensland and the Australian government and New Zealand governments in the next few months. Hopefully, it doesn't take longer than that to resolve. I mean, it'd be good to resolve it soon because, as we've noted, this is not good policy. What it means is that effectively the Queensland government will end up paying more for goods and services it buys because it's providing an extra weighting for local businesses, which means that it may end up buying goods and services that are, more expensive from local businesses, where it can get them cheaper from businesses, outside of the region.
So, as an example, if a government department in Brisbane wants to buy something, let's say some sign writing for its cars. If there was somebody in Townsville who was exceptionally well situated to supply that, could do it at a really competitive price, at a superior quality of result, and in a quick and efficient period of time, if they're more than 125 kilometres away, then somebody closer will get the job, even if it costs more, even if overall there's a 30% deficiency, or let's say a 20% deficiency to be within that range. That somebody could be 20% more expensive, or 20% slower, or 20% less quality, or a balance overall whereby they were considered 20% inferior. They still get the job, and the taxpayer gets a inferior value simply because that person lived closer than the other person. Is that right?
Well, that's quite possible, and that's on the if the procurement officers interpreted the policy as it's been portrayed in some of that, the rhetoric from the government, then potentially you will have much higher costs. I'd like to think that common sense will prevail amongst some of the procurement officers, and they won't prosecute this policy to the full extent that the rhetoric, the parochial policy statement and protectionist policy statement that we've had would suggest they will. So I hope in application we don't end up with really ridiculous outcomes like that, because we could end up with significantly more expensive goods and services being purchased by the state government, because look, competition is a good thing, and competition keeps prices down and it makes businesses more efficient. Yep. And efficiency and productivity are good things. So Paul Krugman said that productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything. So our living standards depend so crucially on the productivity of our population, of our workforce.
Yep.
This is incredibly important.
Yeah, look, a historical example I can think of was the protectionism in India. They protected for a long time. They protected the car manufacturing industry in India, and the local manufacturers there weren't exposed to the risk and competition of a wider market, and so the consumer actually lost. Yes, there were more jobs in India in the car manufacturing industry, and more profits stayed in there and didn't go overseas. And those nice emotional slogans that politicians like to appeal to when they're interfering in the free market. But the reality was that the consumer lost, because with the lack of competition, there was a lack of incentive to produce quality. And the car safety was actually terrible. They were involved in lots of accidents with really, really bad results. And lo and behold, when one day the protectionism was ended and competition was allowed in from overseas, people stopped buying those locally made cars because they were simply rubbish. And the safety was increased and the value was increased. People saved money, and money saved is money earned, and tax-free as well. But it was good for the consumer to have competition, because that productivity drove an increase not only in price but also an increase in quality that the consumer directly benefited from. So,
absolutely, and we did that in Australia too. We protected our car industry,
right?
And over the last couple of decades, we have removed the tariffs, removed the very high rate of tariff protection. We've unwound the subsidies, and now it means that we won't any longer have a car industry. Well, we just weren't competitive in that industry.
Yeah.
But we do have much better quality and much better value for money motor vehicles in Australia than we did in the 70s or 80s. So,
and that's good for value. That's good for the value.
Absolutely.
It's not good for votes. It's not the government's only interested in votes though before value for the consumers. Look, let's have a look at this graphic. Local Zone 1, 125 kilometres. We will prioritise suppliers that maintain a workforce whose usual place of residency is located within 125 kilometres of where the goods or services are to be supplied. Talk us through that. So,
say there's a hospital in or a state government agency in Cairns, and they have to procure some copy paper, for example. Then they would they'll favour buying it from a local business. That procurement policy would suggest, well, they should first look at a local business, but then let's say it really is cheaper to purchase it online and then have it shipped from Brisbane. So they'd prefer to buy it, the more expensive item, locally than get it from somewhere else in the state, for example. I mean, that's what that would suggest. I mean, that may not be a great example, but that's the concept. So we want to. The idea is to favour local suppliers over suppliers, even from elsewhere within the state. So this is one thing that concerns me. I mean, I might be, from time to time, I will do contract work for state government agencies, and I could be disadvantaged if there was a state government office in Cairns or Townsville that's wanting to get some consultancy advice, and I'm not based in Townsville or Cairns, and I could be disadvantaged. So it's not just people in a state or suppliers in other countries. So we know the New Zealanders are very upset about this policy, and their trade minister's lodged a formal complaint. This could disadvantage businesses within Queensland itself.
Now, that's not just a case of, well, the Kiwis are upset, too bad, so bad, stick it in your pipe and smoke it. That's actually risking the business that they buy from us, because the normal situation in international trade, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'll explain this in my simple language, is that if we say we're going to give our locals a 30% advantage over the people in New Zealand that want to sell to us, they could just as easily turn around and say, well, we'll give our local people a 30% advantage when Queenslanders want to sell to us. And so we gain in one hand but lose in the other. Does that always level out? Is it 6 to 1, half a dozen to the other? Or do we stand to lose more than we gain?
Well, look, I think history suggests and economics suggests that the less trade there is, the worse off we all are, because we're not taking advantage of the benefits of trade, of comparative advantage, of specialisation, of being able to buy things cheaper from somewhere else than we could produce them ourselves.
So if we have a bigger market, we're able to specialise more and essentially be more productive and more profitable and employ more people. Is that right?
Oh, exactly. Like we were talking before about productivity. Productivity is everything. So why produce something inefficiently locally when you can buy it from overseas? Use your resources the most efficiently you can, and then sell those goods and services overseas. So that's right. Look, we don't want to. This is the sort of policy. It can cost the state government because goods and services will end up costing more, and if they've got a budget constraint, well, they might end up purchasing fewer goods and services in real terms, or budgets will blow out. So it's not good from a budget perspective. It's not good for taxpayers, and it's not good for the productivity of economy, because we're protecting local businesses from the winds of competition, which encourage businesses to be more efficient and more productive, and which is good in the long run. It's good for living standards.
Now, I want to talk about this graph from your blog.
Yes.
What we can see here is, since the last 5 years, the 2012-13 financial year through to the 2016-17 financial year, that the blue column is exports to New Zealand. That's it. In other words, that's the business that Queensland is selling overseas. That's the profitability locally here. And the orange graph is imports from New Zealand. So that's how much, I guess, we're buying from New Zealand and therefore not buying in Queensland. What we see is that our exports are growing and our imports are shrinking.
Oh yeah, look, absolutely. So so that's why we don't want to engage in measures that could cause other countries to retaliate, because that could end up costing local businesses that do business with New Zealand. So we want to avoid that situation. Nick Berens made a very good point on Steve Austin's show this morning, and what Nick said is that if you look at what's the potential gain to Queensland businesses from this Buy Queensland policy, and there's essentially $3 billion of procurement, extra procurement. That's the maximum that could end up going to Queensland businesses, because Queensland businesses get the bulk of it.
So that's $3 billion that the Queensland government is currently buying outside of Queensland.
Yeah, it's up to that. It's maybe about 2.7 or 8. I can't remember the
exact. So we're at the most 3.
Yeah, at the most 3. But then if you look at the exports that we have to countries with free trade agreements that we have, that's about 40 billion per annum. So, what Nick's saying, why would you risk that? Why should we, be engaging in actions that could make us an international pariah, really, because we're saying, we're going to put the borders up. I mean, this ridiculous protectionist parochial policy. Why would we risk, those exports for, that smaller potential gain? I think that's an interesting way of looking at it. So that's Berens's point.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's just not good policy, because it's going to increase the cost of procurement to Queensland government. That's not good for Queensland taxpayers, and we don't get the efficiency gains, the productivity gains that come from trade, and that will cost us in the long run.
So we stand to really the Queensland taxpayers stand to be getting 30% less value, either through quality or efficiency or actual price.
Well, we have to see how it works in practice, Dave. I mean, I think they said up to 30%, but we have to see how it factors into the formula. And
sure. I think you're being very generous, not giving them the full credit for their rhetoric and putting it down. I'm a little bit more cynical about government's interest in looking after emotional voters as opposed to common sense.
Dave, I don't think they can go through with this policy to the full extent that they've said, because it is causing so many issues for the federal government. It's it does appear maybe legally maybe they're within the letter of the law, but they're certainly not within the spirit of free trade agreements or closer economic relations with New Zealand. It's causing a lot of trouble. I can't see them sticking with this policy to the extent that they said they would. It's bad policy. It's just unsustainable.
Well, hopefully the scrutiny of a election impending for Queensland that could be announced at any day by Anastasia Palaszczuk, hopefully that kind of scrutiny will help see off some really bad economic policy in Queensland. And Gene Tunny, thank you very much for your comments and your advice on this topic, and look forward to chatting to you again.
My pleasure, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.